Hotels have always creeped me out, even before I had an issue with one of the staff members. I used to be grossed out by all the possible germs that could be in the rooms, especially on the bed. But eventually, things got much worse for me. When I was 22 years old, I wanted to visit Nashville, Tennessee because I had an obsession with a lot of the musicians that made it famous out of there. The entire city is full of musical history. It just sucks I wasn't able to enjoy any of that. After finally saving up enough money to spend an entire week out there, I only ended up spending a single evening. I took a plane from Oregon to Nashville, and by the time I landed, it was already 6 p.m. and I was beat. So I planned to just check into my hotel and get a good night's sleep. Then the following day, I was going to meet up with an old family friend that lived just an hour away from the city. She was going to meet me at a restaurant for breakfast, and then we were going to check out the city. It was going to be awesome, so I couldn't have been more excited to get to my hotel and get some sleep. I took an Uber to my hotel, and when I got there, I thought it was really nice. I'd never stayed in a hotel by myself before, so I was happy it didn't look shady. But, as they say, you can never judge a book by its cover. I went inside and walked up to the check-in desk, and behind the counter was a man who looked like he was a few years older than me. I got his attention, and when he looked up at me, it was like he forgot what he was supposed to be doing. He just stared at me without saying a word. After a second of standing there awkwardly, I introduced myself and informed him that I booked a room and was trying to check in. It was like he snapped out of a trance after I began speaking to him. He looked right down at his computer and typed in a few things before pulling out a key card and activating it. He slid it across the counter to me and said, "Enjoy your stay, ma'am." I thought it was weird that he didn't ask me for my ID, but I figured they mustn't have been busy or that he simply wasn't concerned about doing his job properly. So I took the key and began making my way up to my room. But as I walked over to the elevator, I couldn't help but feel like someone was staring at me. I didn't turn to see who it was, but something in the back of my head said that it was that man at the front desk. I made it to my room, and by that time, I had shaken off the strange feeling that I had gotten from him, so I was just happy to see that my room looked clean and relatively nice for what I had spent on it. I locked the door behind me and began getting settled, and after a microwave meal and about an hour of watching TV, I was too tired to stay awake any longer and ended up falling asleep around 8:30. I'm not exactly sure how long I was asleep, but I remember waking up thinking that I heard the sound of something clicking, but I figured it was nothing, so I just rolled over without checking and tried to get back to sleep. But as I was laying on my side facing the window in my room, I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched again. I opened my eye, and through the reflection in the window being created by the glare from the TV, I could see that there was someone standing in my room behind me. I couldn't help but scream as I practically jumped out of the bed. That was when I got a good look at who it was. The man from the check-in desk had used his key to get into my room. As I continued to scream and call for help, the man thankfully didn't try to stop me. Instead, he turned and made a run for the door. And as the door closed behind him, I heard the same clicking noise that had woken me up. It was the sound of the door lock engaging and disengaging from when he snuck in. I called the police and the manager of the hotel, and thankfully they managed to keep the worker in the hotel while the police arrived. The man was arrested, and I assume fired. But as for myself, I couldn't spend another second in that hotel, and ended up using the money that I had saved to buy a plane ticket and decided to end my trip that night. Back when I used to work in the hospitality business, one of the best jobs I ever had was being a housekeeper at a hotel in my city. And I know that might sound a little odd, but it was a really easy job for the most part. For the most part, my worst case scenario was a trashed room, but they gave us gloves, so it really wasn't too bad. There was one instance, though, that was well out of my job description that I most likely never be able to forget. It was during my last year working at the hotel. I was going about my usual job, which mainly included walking from room to room with my cart and making sure that everything was ready for the new guest to arrive. An empty room got checked, and any room that needed cleaning got taken care of. And in no time at all, I was on my first 15-minute break of the shift as I made my way down to the manager's desk to let her know that I was taking my break. I remember walking past a room that was particularly loud, and I remember thinking to myself that it wouldn't be long before security got to tell them to keep things quiet. But after that, I forgot about that room entirely and proceeded to go on my break. I spoke to my manager, and she just sort of brushed it off and told me to go on my break, and then got back to what she was doing. She looked particularly busy, so I decided not to bother her any more than I needed to. I grabbed my coat and stepped outside for a cigarette. By the time I came back in, my manager had calmed down a bit, and I asked her what was going on, thinking that we might have a busy night on our hands. But it wasn't anything like that. Ben, the night shift guard, had called out, and she was looking for someone to cover for him. I told her to try to call Michael, and that he would probably be available, and then I went back to my shift. However, less than an hour after I got back to work, I got a call on my radio asking me if I would do my manager a huge favor. Apparently, she had gotten a hold of Michael, and he was going to come in, but he wouldn't have been to the hotel for another 15 minutes or so, and she needed someone to tell a few guests to quiet down. Right away, I knew the room that she was talking about, and thinking nothing of it, I accepted the job. It didn't seem like a big deal to me. I double-checked the room number that I had to go to, and began making my way there. As soon as I started getting close, I could hear the same sort of rowdy yelling that I heard earlier in my shift, and I proceeded to knock on the door. Silence fell over the room as I announced myself and said that we had a noise complaint. When I heard the door beginning to open, I expected an irate guest at most, but what I ended up seeing was much worse. A grown man swung the door open, and he was clearly intoxicated. He opened the door wider than he planned to and quickly corrected it by closing the door until I could just barely see his face. But it was too late. Inside the room, I could see that he was in there with another man and two young girls that looked like they might have been my sister's age. She was 12 at the time. The man tried to act calm, and he asked me what I was there for, and I replied by letting him know that we had gotten a noise complaint. And I'm not sure why I did it, but something in my head told me to ask him what they were doing there tonight. He and his friend didn't like that though. Instead of getting a response from the man who answered the door, he opened it more and then pulled me into the room. I didn't have time to react. Before I knew it, I was on the floor looking up at the two men who were now attacking me. I couldn't make out much of what was being said as I covered my head with my arms to shield it from any major blows. Thankfully, the attack came to an end shortly after it started when Michael showed up. He ended up getting to the hotel sooner than expected, and our manager asked him to come and check out the noise complaint. Unlike myself, Michael was an ex-police officer and was certified to carry a firearm. So once he showed up, he was able to apprehend both of the men until the cops arrived. Both men ended up being arrested for apparently grooming the two children on MySpace and luring them out to the hotel. Both of the girls were fairly intoxicated by the time we had gotten there. Who knows what would have happened had we not gotten that noise complaint and Michael hadn't shown up. Vacations are supposed to be peaceful and relaxing, but as you know by now, things don't always go as planned. I remember it like it just happened last weekend, even though it was more than 4 years ago. I was on vacation with my girlfriend at the time, Linda, and we were having some fun in Atlantic City. And what was supposed to be the best part was the fact that we managed to get a hotel right on the boardwalk. However, when we got there, we saw that the place was packed. I went up to the front desk and signed in, and after about 20 minutes of waiting, the woman at the desk finally gave us our room keys. Our room had a view of the water and was on the 5th floor of the hotel. And when we first got there, it was everything that we hoped it would be. That was until we noticed that there was a door that we couldn't open, and then were told by a worker that it was actually a door to the adjoining room. And at first, it honestly wasn't that big of a deal. As far as we knew, there was no one occupying the room next to ours, so we shouldn't have had any issues with annoying neighbors. Sadly, things were much more traumatizing than that. The first afternoon that we were in Atlantic City was a lot of fun, and the food that we tried out was delicious. But when we got back to our hotel room, we noticed that things had been slightly moved around, and we wondered what it could have been. I called down to the front desk and asked them if anyone had been in our room because I don't mind room service, but I didn't like the fact that our bags had been opened up and seemed to have been searched through. The person at the front desk assured us that none of the staff had been in our room, and I immediately grew concerned. However, no more than 5 minutes after speaking to the worker at the front desk, my girlfriend heard what sounded like police officers walking around the floor of the hotel. She ran to the door and called them over to us to explain that someone might have been in our hotel room and possibly even stolen something from us. That was when they let us know that they were actually there looking for someone who had been breaking into the rooms all along the boardwalk. Apparently, someone saw them checking out all the doors on this floor and called the police. This information made us uncomfortable, but after the police did a walkthrough of our room and assured us that we were safe, we both managed to calm down and just hoped that the officers found them sooner rather than later. A couple of hours went by, and eventually Linda and I both began to get tired. The two of us decided to call it a night and get ready for the next day. But when we turned off the lights in the room, followed by the TV, we both heard something that we thought was weird. It sounded like someone was walking around in the room next to ours. And that was when I remembered that there was a room attached to ours. I looked over to the door that connected the two rooms, and even though it was still shut, I noticed that there was a small rug in front of the door that looked like it was slightly bunched up. I looked over to Linda and whispered that we need to be quiet and that I think that someone was in the room next to ours, which again would have been normal, except for the fact that we were told the room next to ours would be vacant. We both stayed as quiet as we could and continued to listen to see if we were just freaking ourselves out or not. But when we heard the sound of the bathroom sink running in the room next door, the two of us practically screamed. I whispered to Linda to call the police on her cell phone as quietly as she could, and I began focusing on the door to the room next door to ours. It took about 40 minutes for the police to arrive, but when they finally did, they knocked on the door next to ours and announced themselves. Linda and I thought it was all said and done, but quickly realized we were wrong. When the door that connected our room to the room next to ours flew open, a disheveled-looking man came running through, which caused us both to freak out. We could see that he was in panic, and he looked around frantically. Thankfully, the police ended up hearing us screaming and came rushing into our room to help. They arrested the man and searched the room next door to ours for any of the stolen items, as well as a key card from the front desk that they believe he used to break into the rooms around the hotel. The only silver lining of an otherwise terrifying situation was that the hotel ended up comping our room and upgrading us to a suite on a higher floor for the rest of our stay.